welcome to my kitchen. I'm Elizabeth Hines from TotalWellnessHealthCoaching.com and Functional Medicine Living here on YouTube. And we're continuing with our Thanksgiving prep by working on paleo, gluten-free, dairy-free dressing or stuffing, depending on what you like to call it. Mine isn't going to be completely paleo and dairy-free because, as you can probably see in my skillet, I'm actually using grass-fed butter. Just because my family is okay with that, actually. Grass-fed butter does not bother me, and I'm the one that's the most sensitive. And so we're using grass-fed butter, but I created this recipe using ghee. I tested it with olive oil. I tested it with avocado oil. I would have not used coconut oil because I do not want that flavor in my dressing. But you certainly could if you like that flavor. But aside from that, it is totally paleo. So grain-free, dairy-free, legume-free, all that stuff. I made, which should be the video that went up a week before this, I made my paleo bread yesterday. And you can cut your bread and let it just lay out, and, you know, room temperature and dry out on its own. It'll take about a week for this homemade paleo bread. Or you can toast it in the oven, which is what I did today. I was making my paleo cornbread also to go in the dressing, and that has to bake at 375. So I just toasted my breadcrumbs at 375, and it was completely fine. Now, I am making a half recipe today because I traditionally have hosted Thanksgiving for my family, and so my dressing recipe makes a whole bunch. And I will write it up for you, the whole big amount, but I'm making half amount today. And it's not hard, and you can make it ahead. It's one of those dishes. It has raw eggs in it, and so some people say, oh, you can't make ahead anything with raw eggs. And I mean, I wouldn't make it days in advance, but I do get my dressing ready on Thanksgiving morning. The turkey's in the oven. We usually eat kind of late afternoon. So the turkey's in the oven, and I get my mashed potatoes ready, and I prep all my vegetables, and I have my dressing ready, and then I put it in the refrigerator, and then it's just waiting for the oven to be empty from the turkey so I can put my dressing in. So it certainly can be made the morning of and sit in the fridge for a couple hours until you're ready to bake it. So this is one of those, just chop it and put it in the pan as you get it chopped kind of recipes. So we have celery and onions in with our butter or whatever kind of fat you're going to use. I wouldn't probably use bacon fat in this recipe, maybe half bacon fat, because it's just a strong flavor, unless you want your dressing to taste like bacon, which I can imagine a whole lot worse things. That's just not the flavor that I'm going for. Okay, so at this point we want to put in a little bit of salt and pepper. And we're going to let this cook till it gets pretty soft. It should take about 10 minutes. But while that's going, I'm going to prep my mushrooms. Yes, I put mushrooms in my dressing. We have all kinds of yummy stuff. This is ground pork. And that is so that, I love sausage in my dressing, but we want to be in control of the ingredients that are going into our dishes, so we control what goes into our bodies. And so if you know of a sausage that's totally clean ingredients, you're happy with it, you love the taste of it, by all means you can use a prepared sausage. I wouldn't use an Italian sausage, that's going to have a completely different flavor. You want a sage breakfast sausage. which again is a reason to start with ground pork because you can really get the flavorings that you want. And my recipe calls for using plain ground pork that you're going to add your seasonings to, so you probably want to hold back on some of the thyme and sage, salt, pepper that my recipe calls for if you go with a pre-prepared sausage. So I need some mushrooms. I'm going to give these a little wash. So when I first was dating my husband, I learned all about dressing in their family. It was a really big deal. It was one of those recipes that there really wasn't a recipe written down, but it was like a family famous recipe. And my mom made the dressing growing up, and I loved it. I loved the flavor, the texture, everything. And then I had my mother-in-law's dressing, and it tastes amazing. But their family puts a lot, that's my family now, they put a lot more eggs and just other liquid in their dressing. And so it's very liquidy and smooth. Like our dressing growing up was always kind of chunky, like the bread would not be totally dissolved. You know what I mean? In fact, I saw my mother-in-law making it one time, and I feel like she put something in the blender, and I know it was the eggs, and I'm pretty sure she put the celery and the onions in the blender too, and maybe some other stuff, I don't know. But it definitely has a very smooth texture, which to me just it didn't look as appetizing, so I had to get past that. But once I got past that, the flavor was really delicious. So their dressing is smoother and has a lot more liquid in it. My family's is a little chunkier, a little more of a dry texture. It's not dry at all, but it's just not. Theirs is almost like a souffle. Does that make sense? Like so many eggs, so much broth that it was very much like a souffle. Which souffle is amazing. That's a great thing. So my recipe calls for ranges of salt and broth and that sort of thing. And you can by all means, I would recommend, unless you know how you want your dressing, start with a little bit less of the broth. And as it bakes, you can stir it and taste it, and you can add more. I highly recommend having some good quality homemade either chicken or turkey broth if you happen to cook turkey more than at Thanksgiving and you have some of that in your freezer. I happen to not have any homemade broth right now, so I just have these cartons of chicken broth, not even bone broth. The bone broth they had at Costco this time when I went had natural flavorings and artificial flavorings, and it had weird stuff I didn't want. So this one is the same. In fact, it's organic, but it has natural flavor in it, which is not a natural thing. It kind of excites your brain and causes a lot of people to overeat, make other bad decisions. But it was actually better ingredients than the bone broth one that they had. So anyway, that's what I have right now. It tastes fine, but homemade is definitely better. Okay, so that's going to keep cooking. Once those are where I want them, I'm going to add the pork and the mushrooms and cook until my pork is cooked. And while that's happening, I'm going to mix up my liquid ingredients. So, because that's still cooking, I'm going to go ahead and work on the liquid. Okay, this bowl is for putting my hot stuff into so it can cool a little bit. This big bowl is for mixing up my dressing. So I'm going to put in my eggs. So remember, this is a half recipe, which will be great for, you know, a normal size, average size family, I guess. If you had just like a small gathering for Thanksgiving, or maybe you think a lot of people in your family don't really like dressing and you don't want to have a ton of it left over, whatever. This is a smaller, normal sized amount. My liquids that I'm mixing together are my eggs. I'm going to mix some broth. This one, about 1.5 cups. I include some coconut aminos in my dressing. Let's see, how much? A couple teaspoons. So way back years ago, it's so funny because it's like, how did I watch so much TV when my kids were really little? But I think it was just because they took naps. And when they took naps, if you ever watched TV, but I remember watching America's Test Kitchen or Cook's Country, and they were saying that if you needed to just kind of like zhuzh up the flavor in a recipe, that soy sauce and fresh lemon juice were a great way to do that. I was making something close to that time, and I felt like it needed a little something, and I added, we don't do soy sauce, but we use coconut aminos, which is a paleo safe version of soy sauce. It has a similar umami flavor. And it really worked, and it's kind of been my go-to trick ever since. There's no lemon juice in this dressing, but I did want that extra umami flavor, so a little bit of coconut aminos was perfect. I'm going to go ahead and put in my mushrooms and my pork, so my vegetables are cooked enough, and then I can get this cutting board out of the way. Oops, a little bit more salt. And pepper. Breaking up my pork. There's a kitchen gadget that I've heard people talk about, but I've never actually seen one in person, and I don't know what exactly it's called, but it's like a ground meat chopper. It's something that you would use to do this job that I'm doing right now, but supposedly really does a thorough job of breaking up your ground beef, ground pork, ground turkey, whatever. And I would like to have one for my video editor who's watching this and always asking me for Christmas gift ideas. That's something I would like to have. If you have one, let me know. Do you use it? Do you find it pointless? Do you find it really helpful? I would love to know. Leave me a comment. Okay, so we're going to add our seasonings to this liquid mixture. So I've added some salt and pepper, really only about 1/2 teaspoon. So I'm going to go ahead and add another 1/4 teaspoon of each one to this mixture. And then I have poultry seasoning where I want a couple teaspoons. Again, remember that we're working with a lot of bread that doesn't have any flavoring. And just all real ingredients that aren't already flavored. The only thing that really has flavoring is that broth. Okay, and then I wanted, I don't need dried thyme because I did get some fresh thyme. They have this at my grocery store now. That's called the poultry herb blend, rosemary, sage, and thyme. And I couldn't actually find just thyme, which is the only one that I wanted. But this is okay. So you can chop those little leaves if you want to, but it's not really necessary. I want about a teaspoon of these. This will be a great thing for little kids to help with, pulling the leaves off, because it's kind of satisfying. Okay, so now we add our bread to our liquid. And then it's going to start soaking up that liquid while our hot stuff is still going over here, and then we're actually going to let it cool a teeny bit before we add that in. Okay, so I want about 4 cups of this bread. This is my cornbread, which it's dark from the flaxseed, and it's been a long time since I've had real cornbread, but I think I would still prefer this paleo version. It just has such a great flavor. I love it. So I'll have that recipe for you too. It's not hard to make, so. And I actually do have a video of it already, so I can just link to that one. And I haven't changed that recipe in ages. Okay. We do more piece of cornbread. We're having a chili cook-off at church on Sunday, so I think I will be able to just put that cornbread in the fridge, and we can take it and it'll be fine to share on Sunday. So now if I were making my full recipe, I would have needed all of this bread and probably half of the cornbread. So I just press it down in the liquid. Remember, we dried out the bread so that it would be ready to take on the flavorful liquid that we have created. The broth, the seasonings, the eggs, all of that yummy stuff. This guy just needs to cool a little bit before we can add him to this mixture. So now I just will pause and clean up a little bit, and I'll show you how I put it together and taste it and get it in the oven. Okie dokie, through the magic of YouTube, some time has passed and my meat and vegetable mixture has cooled some. It's, it's not completely chilled. I didn't put it in the fridge or anything. Actually, when Thanksgiving time rolls around, it's usually cool enough that I can set it outside, put a little towel or something on top of it so the squirrels don't eat it, but I can just use nature to help me a little bit. We want to actually get all of that liquid out because that liquid is the butter that we cooked our vegetables in, and the juices that kind of cooked out of the vegetables. So we want all of that liquid. We put that butter in there on purpose, or ghee or olive oil, whatever it is you're using. Okay, so this looks yummy. Yes, this does have raw eggs in it, but I want to taste it because if it's terribly low on seasoning, it's going to be hard for me to kind of make that up later. And if it's too salty for some reason, like maybe this broth, which I've never used this brand of broth before, maybe it is very salty, and I need to add some more bread and soak up some of that. So if you're not comfortable just tasting this with the raw eggs in it, which my eggs were fine, they were fresh pasture-raised eggs, so they didn't smell bad. My eggs are fine, so I'm fine with tasting this. But if you're not, just do the same thing you would do with like a meatloaf or a meatball, where you just cook a little piece of it in your skillet to get a taste. It's actually perfect on the herbs, but it does need a little more salt. So about half a teaspoon more salt and a sprinkling of pepper. And I actually want a little bit more broth, I think, right from the get-go. this point, I'm just going to use my rubber spatula. It's going to make my life easier. I'm going to put it in the pan. So this is a 9 by 13, which is plenty big. Actually, we can make our giant recipe of this in a 9 by 13. It is kind of full, so if you have like a really deep roasting pan, that will make your life easier if you make the full recipe. I hate dealing with parchment paper because it's kind of a pain in the neck, but your future self will always be super happy if you use parchment paper. So I'm kind of holding it with my wrist that's holding my bowl so the paper doesn't slide all over. So just move this out. My recipe calls for baking this at 350, but if you only have one oven, as I do, I'm just going to trim this a little bit because it's kind of excessive. And say everything else that you're making for Thanksgiving needs to bake at 325 or 375. It's totally fine. Believe it or not, when I was creating my Paleo Thanksgiving recipes, I intentionally had everything bake at 350. Aside from the turkey starts at a high temperature, then moves to a lower temperature. But all my casseroles, the sweet potato casserole, the dressing, sometimes we make like a broccoli, cauliflower, carrot, cheese sauce kind of casserole. Sometimes we have macaroni and cheese. All of it, I have it all baked at 350 because I just have the one oven. So here's our dressing. It's, you know, it's not the prettiest, It's going to go in the oven for a half hour, 45 minutes-ish, and we'll stir it a little bit through, and I'll show you that process and show you when it's done. Okay, I want to show you what this looks like at this point in the cooking process. It starts to look a little dry around the corners. So I just kind of stir it up. Make sure it's not too dry. So I'll stir it, make sure it's not too dry, which it's not, and then put it back in the oven. It's been in there for 40 minutes already. It's cooked, the eggs are cooked. We could bring it out at any time. But my chicken isn't quite done and my green bean casserole isn't quite done, so I'm just going to put it back in the oven. I pulled out a little bit to taste, and we'll make sure it's seasoned well. So we'll let that bake for just about 10 more minutes, and then I'll show you the finished product. Okay, here's the star of the show, the very beautiful dressing. And there's our green beans. I didn't have it in me to also roast a turkey today on top of creating this recipe and filming this one. So we just had some chicken thighs in the freezer. I cleaned out the freezer today, and when you do that, you see all the food that you have. Shocking, right? And I just could not bring myself to go to the grocery store and buy a rotisserie chicken, a raw chicken, a turkey, whatever, when I had so much meat in the freezer. So this was just a package of bone-in, skin-on chicken thighs, salt and pepper. Baked those in the oven. The green bean casserole, if you're interested in a paleo, actually it's not paleo, it's just gluten-free because of some seasoning that I used. But a really tasty gluten-free green bean casserole recipe, let me know and I will film that for you. I don't have it planned right now, but I can work it in if you want it. And then here's the dressing, which again, it's such a shame that this is not a really pretty dish because it tastes so amazing. But it's so flavorful. We've got, of course, our homemade paleo bread and cornbread. Kind of made our own sausage with the pork and poultry seasoning and sage and thyme and salt and pepper, onion, celery, butter, coconut aminos, just all yummy, yummy stuff. So I'm going to build a plate and then we'll take a pretty picture. But actually, I can let you go. You don't have to stick around for that. Let me take a final taste. It's so yummy. It's so flavorful. If you felt like, yeah, we could have gluten-free dressing, but there's no way we could make paleo dressing, well, here you go. And it's not like I just made this up. I made this recipe years ago. We've been making it for years, and it's foolproof and it's delicious. Nobody says, oh, is this gluten-free or is this paleo? Unless people have allergies, then I assure them that it fits their diet. But it's just delicious, and you can enjoy all your holiday goodies like everybody else and not feel sick at the end of it, which, you know, we want to have the great time with our family, but we really don't want to be sick at the end, and we want to be able to eat the treats. So I consider dressing a treat. I hope you do too. I hope you enjoyed this video. So thanks again for watching, everybody. You can find this recipe linked down in the description box. It takes you to my website, which has a free printable version of this recipe, and you can find it there. All right, let me know if you have questions, everybody, and I look forward to seeing you next time.